Alright, Muck. This game is a mix of survival and roguelike genres, and was made by Danny, a content creator who posts variety content on games of his own creation. Even though this game's simplistic design and certain special items make it seem like a joke, Muck is a relatively well-balanced game and is very well made for what it is, and one that offers a rather interesting playing experience. However, I feel like that's enough flattery for the game, as now it's time to delve on to the focus of this video. When you load into Muck for the first time, you'll most likely attempt the default survival game mode on one of three difficulties: easy, normal, and gamer, and the latter will serve as the focus for today's video. Now, before I can explain to you why this difficulty is so hard, I need to tell you how the game functions and also how progression is forced upon the player. Regardless of what difficulty you play on, Muck is a game that increases the strength and abundance of enemies that will spawn based on the number of days you've been playing, and in order to meet this rise in power, you are given the ability to mine resources to craft weapons and armor, open chests varying in costs depending on the loot pools contained within them, trading with villagers, and lastly defeating elephants and bosses in the game. Most people make their first mistake the second they start through their playthroughs, in fact. They try to take it slow, make it through the first night learning the mechanics and not bothering with the power-up system, which I'll really get onto in a moment, and obviously new players won't be panicking about the difficulty of the enemies as they have no reference. And if they chose normal or easy difficulties, the player seems tanky enough to withstand anything with slight care. However, day 1 rolls around and most unprepared players are overwhelmed by the jarring increase in the enemy's strength. By the end of the second night, the player will be overwhelmed by the enemies and be forced into running away, most likely losing some of their resources and falling into a cycle of enemies spawning faster than the player can kill. As day 3 makes its debut, the exponential curve in difficulty makes itself even more obvious, and has stronger enemies that are capable of naturally spawning as the days progress, paired with the ever-increasing base stats of these enemies. This is where most people's first run ends. So, after going through all of that, the inexperienced player might feel slightly annoyed and confused, as without an understanding of the fundamental mechanics you can't really make all that much progress, but that's where I want to help you out. I'm no professional at this game, but I've devised a strategy that will allow any player to beat the game at the hardest difficulty, and with practice it'll become very easy, so I suppose we should begin with this optimal method. Now, one thing you definitely didn't think about seriously upon your first playthrough was the seed you loaded into. If you input the same seed in 2 separate games, you'll spawn in the exact same place, and the chests, battle towers, boss statues, and any other items will remain as well. This means that if you find a good seed, you can learn where things are and make early game very efficient, which is by far the most important stage of the game. Now, the goal is to do as much as humanly possible on the first day of playing, and in order to be efficient you'll need a powerful weapon. Initially, I thought that finding a seed where you spawned inside a village would be the best, since you can often buy an adamantite sword from the villagers there for a measly 75 coins. The issue was that farming those coins with no viable weapon was tricky, and even though you could play it safe and farm resources to sell to the villagers, it was super inefficient. What's more, the sword becomes obsolete really quickly with a base DPS of 70, which is meagre in comparison to a lot of other weapons in the game. After scrapping that idea, I started looking at the wiki to look for superior alternatives, and I found something absolutely incredible. The Nightblade, the strongest melee weapon statistically in the game, is obtainable through cavern chests with a 1 in 1000 drop rate. Now, these caverns are quite elusive, with only a couple spawning on every island. However, I was saved from having to do the grind myself by a comment on the Muck Wikipedia page, giving the seed 2212945111, one that allowed you to find a cavern with a Nightblade in it within the first 30 seconds of the game. This weapon has a base DPS of 149.5, and you don't have to do anything but open a free chest in order to obtain it. Additionally, with this ridiculous power you are capable of numerous tasks from the very start, and since the run is so early you can always restart, there's no consequence in taking these risks. Exhibit A, the Gronk spawner on the way to the cave. This isn't a fight that you'll be able to get 100% of the time, but Gronk is one of the 4 repeatable bosses in the game, dropping an abundance of gold, an accessory, and maybe even oakwood, a material you're not supposed to have access to for the first couple of days. Even though Gronk seems like it would be a difficult fight, there are ways of manipulating the attacks. Even though the boss has a 1.75 times health boost from the shrine used to summon it, the boss has 1 close range attack that can be avoided by a burst of sprinting, and 2 range attacks that can be nullified by standing behind the surrounding trees. The boss will only have a maximum of 1300 HP if you summon him at this stage, so you can slaughter him in about 15 hits. Okay, with Gronk defeated, you have the best weapon in the game, at least 1 accessory, and you are ahead of the exponential curve right now. However, you can't stop increasing that gap, otherwise the game will catch up to you, so the next step is grinding out black and bronze loot containers, killing cows and activating shrines, which is the most important part of this phase. Shrines are a landmark you can interact with like boss statues, but upon activation, 3 random buff variants of normal enemies are summoned. Each enemy can drop a wide variety of coins and other items, but most importantly, once you complete a shrine and kill all 3 enemies, a random power-up is spawned. This is your best shot at getting legendary power-ups, as I would not recommend spending your coins on anything but bronze chests for now. There are 50 shrines in the world and countless black and bronze chests, so keep looting. On day 1 you should still be one-shotting all of the enemies, but remember that every single enemy scales with the increasing health and damage as the days progress. Even when you stop farming these chests and shrines as priority, always activate them whenever you see them, and unlock as many chests as possible. You won't need much money for other things in this run. So, that's in truth all you should do on your first day of playing. Getting to day 2 means you'll have a moment to craft anything you want, and at this stage I should introduce 2 points of key progression that you should be working on in the background, while powering up your character. Now, the Gronk fight you did earlier in this run was completely optional, but now you have a different mandatory mission. You need to find a boat map by searching the green chests scattered throughout the world. Unlike the loot containers, these chests contain actual items, and the boat map is very helpful, spawning in the first green chest you see. See, to reach the end in Muck, you have to obtain all sorts of resources throughout the entire game, but you also need 5 gemstones, red, yellow, green, blue, and pink ones respectively, and they are scattered throughout the map. And to find them, you need to loot the chest on the boat. That chest will contain a gem map, which reveals the location of the gems if you press M. The last factor is that each gem is guarded by the Guardian, one of the more intimidating bosses in the game, and the only boss you have to defeat in order to leave Muck. Once you have an abundance of power-ups, however, you should be able to deal massive damage to the boss. The 3 attacks the Guardian has are simple to dodge. Firstly, some melee swipes towards the player, which can be avoided by sprinting away from the boss. Next up is a predictive area of effect attack that spawns damaging crystals below where the game believes the players will be heading, and this can be avoided by a last second change in direction. Lastly, the Guardian has an Omega Beam of some sort, a blast of energy that does incredible damage, but it can in fact be nullified by standing behind trees and builds. With those factors taken into account, you should find them easy enough, and these bosses drop more money for you to unlock even more chests and make yourself even more powerful. Once you have the 5 gems, you are well on your way to finishing the game. Now, however, the boat grind begins. At this stage, you're pretty powerful and capable of defending yourself, so what you should be doing is dedicating your time to the boats. In order to fix everything, you'll need every crafting station in the game except the cauldron, which I would still recommend making to cook anything dropped from cows. You will need 152 wood, 60 rocks, 30 wheat, 10 raw meat, 15 oak wood, 28 dark oak wood, 15 fir wood, 32 iron bars, 8 obarmium bars, 9 gold bars, 5 adamantite bars, 13 flax fibers, 5 ropes, 11 rubies, 1 ancient core, and 5 coloured gems dropped by the Guardians. You will need to progress through the tiers of tools in order to harvest some of these materials, so unless you want to grind bosses, which I wouldn't recommend, I would say that you should try and obtain an adamantite pickaxe and axe. They're really efficient, and you can buy a mithril pickaxe from naturally spawning villagers at some of the NPCs there. While you are gathering these resources, activate any shrines and boss statues you feel comfortable fighting, since you'll need as much power as you can get in order to make this work. Additionally, I would recommend crafting a mix of adamantite and obarmium armor for this battle. Obarmium is slightly better but much less efficient to smelt, so I use a mix of the two. Before we go into the final stage of the game, you want to make sure that you have at least 10 food items capable of regenerating health, hunger, and stamina. I would recommend bread or anything sold by NPCs and villagers, as most of the food is pretty beneficial in terms of saturation. Lastly, I wanted to cover some alternative weapons and setups for the final stage of the game, and even though the seed covered in this video is amazing in terms of giving you the ultimate setup, this run is possible on a random seed as well. Each boss drops components towards their own weapon, as well as sometimes a very low chance of dropping the weapon itself. These are all melee items. First up we have the Chunky Hammer, and in order to obtain this weapon, Big Chunk will need to be defeated in your world. This boss is really easy to take down once you have some vertical accessories and you can jump over all of his attacks. And the weapon itself has a base DPS of 114. It's nothing to sneeze at for sure, and it's crafted with a hammer shaft and 15 chunky bars at an anvil. Next up is Gronk's Sword, a weapon crafted from a sword hilt and a blade, alongside 10 dark oak wood. It also drops from Gronk with a 2.5% drop chance, and like the Night Blade, can spawn in cavern chests with a 1 in 1000 chance. It has 121 DPS, and is a rather effective weapon. Next for melee weapons, we have the Chief's Spear, the only weapon I can say comes close to the Night Blade. It is dropped from the Chief at a 2.5% drop rate, as well as being craftable with a spear tip and 15 dark oak wood at an anvil. This item can also be rarely found at villages inside the Chief's chest with a 3% chance, but be careful when looting, as opening his chest will turn all villagers in this area hostile. This weapon has a DPS of 142.5, but is something no other melee weapon really has: range. This weapon is absurdly effective for the early game, as a lot of the risk of getting hit is eliminated entirely. The last two weapons I would recommend are the Obarmium Sword and the Wyvern Dagger. These two weapons are strong, but much less so than the previously mentioned weapons, so they should be acquired if your run has been unfortunate. To contrast melee having a lot of viable options for this endgame, I'd only really recommend one thing for anyone trying to play Ranger, the Ancient Bow. It shoots 3 arrows at once and is devastating when paired with lightning arrows. It can be bought from villagers rarely, but also crafted with an ancient bone and a piece of rope at a fletching table. The bone is dropped from any goblins with a 1% chance or Gronk with a 10% chance. Okay, that's pretty much everything regarding your loadout in this game. So with that said and done, let the final battle commence. Once everything has been placed in the ship, an exclamation mark will appear at the steering wheel and you'll be able to exit Muck. And upon activating it, the entire map will be flooded and the final boss will spawn, Bob. Bob only has 2 types of attacks: ranged fireballs he fires from a distance, and melee attacks that apply potentially lethal damage to the player up close. And you have very limited space to dodge on the ship. The Ancient Bow is great for this fight, but if you get a melee weapon alongside of an abundance of power-ups, you'll be able to do massive damage when he does get close. And the high tier armor will provide insane protection even in gamer mode. Although this fight is intimidating, it follows this game's trend of being too simple for its own good, as every boss so far has had incredibly well choreographed attacks that anyone with an eyeball can spot, and Bob is no exception. You can chip at his HP with a bow, and when he gets close, use a melee weapon for incredible damage, and the boss should fall. It's something of an anticlimactic finish, but that's Muck completed. Now, it seems simple enough to execute, but as we all know, practicality doesn't equate to theory 100% of the time, so I decided to do my own playthrough of the game to see if I could pull it off. And this was my first actual attempt at beating the game, and also my first time playing solo. And if you want to know how good the strategy truly was, I completed the game in 43 minutes and 9 seconds. That at the time of recording this video is the 18th fastest time ever achieved on a seeded run, and I did this on the hardest difficulty possible, whereas other people on the list were playing on easy. I fine-tuned the strategy a little bit to better suit my own playstyle, and while the highlights of this run play out, let me tell you about the smaller things I picked up on. Firstly, this was never meant to be a speedrun. This was my third attempt at this run, and the other 2 attempts were instant deaths to the first Gronk. If you learned the layout of this map, then it would be the easiest run of all time, and it was still super easy for myself. This run overall is very RNG based, as the power-ups you get are completely randomized. You need a variety of power-ups in order for this to be a successful run in order to balance your character. In terms of the most important accessories of the run, however, let me go over a couple of them. First up, we have the Sneaker, the Jetpack, and Janix Frogs, the 3 main mobility boosts this game has to offer. Obviously being faster is going to make you more efficient, but it also makes the bosses even simpler. You can afford to be more careless as it's easier to reach a safe distance, so a good run should have a lot of these power-ups. Next up is Peanut Butter, the Spoo Bean, Crimson Dagger, and Broccoli, which are what I like to call maintenance power-ups. They allow your character to recover more easily or go further without having to replenish your stamina or hunger, and Broccoli in particular is amazing. It is the only way in the game that you can get passive life regeneration. The Crimson Dagger grants you lifesteal, which is always helpful when night falls and enemies spawn for a longer period of time. Next up to note, there are simply put the power items. These boost your stats and increase your odds of winning a fight. These are the Red Pill, Blue Pill, Dumbbell, Orange Juice, Robin Hood Hat, Danish Milk, Dracula, Horseshoe, Sniper Scope, Enforcer, Wings of Glory, Berserk, Adrenaline, and the Nuts Hammer. All of which increase either your offense or defense. Other accessories I haven't mentioned here still have their utilities, but that's how I classify the power-ups for myself. Right, the next topic of discussion is how long you should spend powering up. Technically speaking, if you finish building the boat, it would be worth your while to go around the map and fight a bunch of bosses and shrines, getting as many power-ups as possible before facing Bob. And if you're really struggling, you could always farm for the full Barmium armor too, and although I think that would give you the maximum chance of winning, I don't think you'd really be in danger anyways. This run in particular has a ridiculous ending that I went into thinking I was severely underpowered, but in fact Bob didn't stand a chance against the Nightblade in this flurry of critical attacks, going down in a matter of minutes. If you're beating the game for the first time, farm for more powerful items and all the bronze chests you have to offer, but once you've fought the majority of the shrines and the gains in power start to slow down, you should 100% leave Muck and face Bob before his exponential power renders your efforts useless. It's why I chose to fight him on day 7. He is tanky but lacks the power to threaten me even here. If your character was 3 times stronger than mine but you chose to fight Bob on day 15 or higher, you'd have just as hard a time as I would, if not harder due to the exponential curve in difficulty. Once you have all of that under control, you should be good to finish the game, and impress all of your friends who are new to the game by showing off your snazzy jumping skills. And with all of that said, that's going to be the end of the video. I hope some of you can use this run and method to get some impressive times on the leaderboard. I want to increase the skill level of the game, so one of you guys should aim for a sub 25 minute run or something ridiculous like that. But that's where I leave Muck for now. I hope you enjoyed this new format of video, and if you did, then feel free to leave a like and subscribe if you haven't already, and as always, I will see all of you in the next one. Peace out, guys.